Hello, everybody. Welcome to our January Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is converting table transformation snippets into components. We're going to go over not just how to create and use snippets, but how to identify which snippets would be good candidates to turn into components and the process for how you would do that. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as this session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of the Zoom window. Your presenter today is Barbara McQuillan, Training Supervisor. Barbara, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Erica. So hello and welcome. We are going to be talking about converting our table transformation snippets into components. So our plan for today, we're going to start by just discussing what the heck is a component. It is one of our newest features inside OU Campus, so we'll go over that. We'll discuss which snippets should not be converted into components. So there's certain considerations you need to make when looking at snippets that are already a part of your implementation. We'll take the ones that can be converted or should work appropriately, and then we'll talk about the actual process converting your snippet into a component. And then we're going to talk about considerations for snippets that have select lists. So that is an extra little piece that you just want to keep an eye on. So starting at the top, what exactly is a component? Well, a component is our newest feature inside OU Campus. So it's our newest type of reusable content. And it is essentially a combination between the way that a snippet works and the way that an asset works. Components allow you to reuse structure and stylizing, but keep content unique, similar to the way a snippet works. It's unique here in that instead of having, say, a table inside the editable region where you change out the content in table cells, instead, as an administrator, when you set this up, you prompt your editors with form fields. So you can have very specific form field questions that you're asking, and your editors are restricted specifically to those, and they're inputting just that information. The the component itself is customizable on the page. So you can have unique content on each page where the component exists. But the unique thing about components is that they're still associated with that original base set of code. So like an asset, if you make a change to the component's base code or the form fields that you've set up there, that change is going to be reflected across all of the pages that the component is already appearing on. An important thing to note on this, if you're going to add new fields to a component, any existing instances will not yet have inputs for that field. So keep that in the back of your heads if you are making adjustments to the component itself. If you're asking for additional information, you'll need to go back to the pages that have that component on it in order to give inputs for those particular questions. So let's actually take a look at a component so we can see how it functions. So here I am logged into my sandbox environment. I'm going to go ahead and just find a page to play on. Hovering over content, going to pages. I personally am a big fan of the library page. So I'm going to use this particular page as my environment to play with components. Opening up my main content region here. I'm just going to hit Control-A and delete everything out of here so we have a nice blank workspace to work with. Inside the editable region, the icon for a component looks like this little atom here. So clicking on that will give you my listing of different components that are available. I have 2 set up right now. I can filter by tag and I can filter by name. I'm going to take a look at that student spotlight component. Bottom right hand corner, when I click insert, I'm immediately prompted with my form fields. So these are different fields that I have pre-created and pre-associated with the snippet code. And this one just happens to be doing a student spotlight information. So I'll go ahead and add in the student name here. The major, my graduating year, oh, can't be too honest on that one. Let's call it next year. And then my inspirational statement. Notice this box a little bit taller. This allows me to put in more content into it. So this is the inspiration that taught me who I am today. Beautiful. So all of the fields we've looked at so far are text fields of one kind or another, but there are a lot of options when we're talking about form fields that are available. Down here at the bottom, I do have a form field here, which is specifically an image chooser. So As the administrator who created this component, I can specify where I want you to be dropped off when you go searching for these images. And it's going to restrict me to image files only. Bottom right-hand corner, I'll insert that image. Notice it is bringing in the dependency tag. So Dependency Manager will be working with the pieces that you're including in your content here. My bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to click Save. And you're going to notice the way that I have this one set up, I'm seeing the preview inside the editable region. You actually have an option on that. You can have it preview what it will look like, or you can have it kind of like pill form, the way your assets kind of have that placeholder inside the system. There's a question here that says, when you insert the image, are you prompted for the alt text on the description? So the way that I have this set up, I've only asked specifically for the image itself. I could have an additional field asking for the alt text as well. That would just need to be included on the component. But yes, you can have that field in there and you can make it required. So taking a look over here at my component, looks like I forgot how to spell my name. So clicking on it once, I'm going to get the option to edit it, or I could delete it off completely. I'm going to go ahead and edit it so I can remember how to spell my name appropriately. Bottom right-hand corner, I'll click Save. Perfect. So now I have this all set up. I'll go ahead and save and exit, and I'll be able to see that render. So all the stylizing, the size and shape of this different text, this is a bold line, that one's italics, where my image is being placed. That's all provided as part of the source code of the component itself. And as I mentioned, changes to the component's original code base will populate over here. So hovering over content, I'm going to open up my components area in a new tab. Here's my student spotlight component. So let's open this up. And checking it out, I'll get a whole bunch of options in my page actions toolbar here. So under my form elements, I can have an additional field added in here specifically for that alt text. So let's do that. I'm going to grab another field here. I'll add it in. It is a short text, so it's simply a singular line of text. And I can add my label here. Please provide alt text for the image. I can make that field required as well. So that way there's no option on it. It has to be included. We'll talk more about the rest of these options in just a minute. But save. Question here says, do code changes take immediate effect or only once you republish the pages that include the component? A great question. Let me make a code change and I'll show you. Up here at my tabs, I have my source. And in my source, I'll see the actual source of the image. So right now I have it configured so that way the alt is actually using the student name. But maybe I don't want that student name to be used. I want to allow people to put in their own description for it. So over here on the left-hand side, there's that text field that I just created. I have my cursor right in the source code where I want it to be. I'm going to click it once to be able to add the input from that field right there. Let's make some additional changes. On my original component, my major here was bolded. And then the date or the graduation year here is italicized. Maybe I don't want those. I'm going to take those nodes out of here. So no bold, no italicization. Bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to click Save. Perfect. The adjustment in order to push it out just needs to be launched. Launching it here will give me the opportunity to put in a version description. I do highly recommend using your version descriptions, whether you're launching a component or publishing out content across your site. It allows you to have a nice little blurb so you have some information about what has been changed. So we added the alt text field and changed the text display in code. Bottom right-hand corner, launch. That change that I've launched has launched throughout OU Campus. So if I come back to that library page and just do a quick refresh here, I'm going to see that the italicization and the bolding has been removed here. Remember, OU Campus, though, is a decoupled system. So the change that I made here, I'll see inside OU Campus. But if this was something that had already been published out, I would need to republish the page in order for that to update on my live page. Now, something to be aware of, because I just added that form field, I don't have any input in here yet. Even though this was a required field, the component was placed here before that alt text existed. So I'm going to need to add my content in here. So this is a, yep, agreed, it is absolutely required. Portrait of me. Save and save. All right, got another question here that's asking me, can you add more than one profile with the component onto the same page? So you can have multiple components on a page itself. So maybe over here, we'll go ahead, try that again. We're going to remove that, quick refresh. So let's go ahead and see if we can add in a second student spotlight here. Sure. My alt text is going to be required here. And at this point, I have only had that one image uploaded, so I'm going to be repeated across the board here. Perfect. So I do have multiple instances of that component on my page without a problem. Question here, can you specify the alt text required only if an image is specified? So right now, each field is set up independently. So what I would probably want to do at that point is make the picture required as well. That way the picture and the image are both required, but there is not a setup right now to be able to make it conditional. Another question here, how do you set it to preview, not the code asset lines? All right, so as I mentioned before, right now inside my editable region, I do have it previewing so I can actually see it. This is a great option if your component is bringing in actual HTML. Inside the component itself, when I'm looking at the source code, over here on the left-hand side, I can specify whether or not I want it to preview within that WYSIWYG editor or not. So if this is HTML that's getting pulled in, that should work fine. Yes, you can have a preview. If you're pulling in any other kind of code, if you're pulling in scripts or JavaScript or things like that, those won't preview appropriately inside the editable region, so you'd want to leave it set to no. Let me save and launch so you can see what that looks like. Removed WYSIWYG preview. Back over here, quick refresh. We open that region again. Now I get essentially just these little pills. So it's the acknowledgement here, just like with an asset, saying, yes, you've placed your component in here. Let's see, got that. One more question. If a component is changed in the launch, is there a prompt or warning about pages that use that component? So I didn't get any kind of acknowledgement here or any kind of warning. So as you are launching your components, keep in mind, components are unique types of reusable content. They are going to update your code base across the site. So if you have a component and you want to keep the original and be able to kind of have a secondary version of it, I recommend hovering over file and copying it instead. This will allow you to have a secondary version of that component, so the original on its original pages is not going to be influenced if you make changes to it. I have a question here about whether or not I can upload images on the spot. So let's open that up again. When I'm browsing for my image here, just like when you're selecting any image, you do have the ability to upload right here. So I could upload an additional image as I went through it. What if the snippet has multiple fields for slider? Then the how will component be? We're going to save that for a second when we talk about snippets that should not be turned into components. Another question about an accordion, we'll come back to that. Can a user do any sort of formatting to the text they enter, making it bold or italic? The answer to that one is no. And that's the idea of components. Your components are very, very specific in the formatting that you're given. In the component itself, I am specifying in my source code exactly where that input is going to go. So this is going to be a very strict usage of this design element, similar to the way a snippet works. Now, if you wanted to, if you had, say, the option for additional classes, you could have a form field called class and maybe have a drop down or radio buttons or something like that where people could select the appropriate class to apply to it. That you could do and simply have that value dropped into this class attribute. But beyond doing something like that, no, components are giving you that really strict structuring that oftentimes you'll want in order to make sure you have some nice consistency across the board.
If there is, I believe, in the form elements, I believe there's an advanced element that has a mini WYSIWYG editor.
That is true.
So if you wanted to give users the ability to format text, you would use that instead of a text field. But that does have sort of the same options that you would see when you were creating a web content asset, basically.
Thank you, Erica.
So.
Yep, good point. It does give you the option of being able to have that WYSIWYG, so you would have some of that editing abilities there. Questions about nesting snippets? Again, I'm going to hold on to that one for a second as we talk about more considerations about what should or should not become a component. Components inside components, similar to the way a table transformation works. So components are not going to be placed within another component. They're going to be kind of self-contained, and I'm betting that probably has to do with, again, the nesting that you see in some snippets. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Rephrasing my question here, if a component is used in many web pages, how does an admin know what web pages are using that component? So that is an excellent question. Right now, the way that the system is set up, components are not utilizing dependency tags or anything like that. So you could do a find search for something particular that's part of the component itself, but there is not a listing right now. So I did talk to our product team about it. There is an intention to be able to have an option here that shows you all of those dependencies, all the pages that have it on it. It is just not in, part of the listing right now. Question of, can the component code use XSL like conditional statements as we do with table transformations? So the table transformation itself, what you're dropping into the page is just flat HTML. So hovering over content, going to snippets. Let me open up an example snippet over here. I've gone ahead and created a Trading Tuesday examples. So if I say open up my 2-column snippet, what you're actually dropping onto the page is a table that just has a particular class. And it is calling, or that class is being seeked by the XSL. So when you do have a table transformation that has conditionals and things like that, like if you're choosing the number of columns or something like that, that's not actually happening on the page itself. It is happening in the XSL in the background. When I create my source code for my component, though, I do have a whole bunch of different options for different languages. But as I'm taking a look at my listing here, XSL is not listed here. So you'd still want your XSL separately, but you could set it up the way a table transformation is, where you have a specific class that's being called by the component, and then have a separate XSL file that's doing that consideration and conditioning for you. I have a question here is there a null value for drop-down, radio, or checkboxes? So back to my form elements, when I have one of these kind of multiple options here, I can have my label. I need to throw something in here. So this is a radio button. On my fields here, if I have something chosen inside the form field itself, it will be pre-selected on the form. So you could have, say, like a default option already chosen here when you create the form field itself. That we'll talk about in a second. Question, once an edited component is launched, am I notified or given an option what pages must be republished to get the changes reflected on the production server? Or is it like an asset in that once the component is launched, all affected pages get republished? If it's not a connection between the two components and pages news them, how do I know it needs to be published? Good question. So let's come over here, cancel. Let's save and publish this page out. Okay, so here I am on my live page with my changes in here. Coming back to my component, I got rid of all of my extra stuff. Let's change my source code here again. Let's make that major bold again. Perfect. Save, and we'll launch from here. Perfect, so my component has been launched. So back inside OU Campus, quick refresh. I can see my majors on both of those are bolded. Back to my live page, I can do a refresh with a cleared cache, and I'm not seeing the bolding happening here. So I would need to have that republished. And then the question here is, how do I know it needs to get republished? That is an excellent question. So ultimately, that's something that our product team will be able to provide. Essentially, it's a listing of what pages are dependent upon it. So let me make a quick note for our product team on that. It is possible to hit the API to be able to get a direct listing of all of the pages that are included on it, but having something nice in the interface would be nice.
There are plans for future updates to components to both when you launch a component to have a review where it does list every page that that component is included on, and anywhere major changes will need to be synced up, and also to have a report to have any pages where the component has been changed but the page hasn't yet been published to be listed under the out of sync pages under the required actions report. So there are plans to incorporate that functionality into the product. They just aren't part of this initial deployment of components.
Thanks, Erica. So kind of follow-up question on that is asking about whether or not, so until then, we would essentially need to republish the site or keep an inventory of our own. I agree at this point in time, having an inventory would probably be very helpful, but it is something that our product team is looking at and working on as we speak. Another question here, can we copy a component from site to other sites? So back to my component itself, checking it out under properties. I have the ability to decide whether or not this particular component is available account-wide or if I want to limit it to selected sites. So you can make that adjustment right here, the same way you would set that kind of stuff on, say, your snippets. So you can specify if it's available across multiple of your sites, or you can restrict them from it. Question about what does the source code look like on the page that the component has been inserted? So let's come on over to my library page here. We'll take a look at our source. So further down, we're going to see our component right now has a lot of information included on it. So what we're seeing here, is essentially the component information itself. And then each of the inputs that I put in is being associated with this particular string that is noting that particular field on it. So this will adjust over time to be a little bit nicer aesthetically looking inside our source code. But for now, this is what it looks like inside the source code itself. So if you wanted to specifically search and find, you could focus in on this particular component call information here. All right, more questions. Ooh, let me scroll up a little bit on that. Can a component be within a snippet? It's an excellent question. I don't see why not on that.
Yeah, you can, once a snippet is on a page, you can insert a component into it because all the snippet is just adding code into the page itself. But you cannot include a component into the source code of the snippet itself, if that makes sense. So for the original snippet file, you can't insert a component in that, but then once the snippet is on a page, you can add the component into that, no problem.
Thanks, Erica. What would CSS component be used for, or some of those drop-down choices of the file type there? So inside the component itself, when we're looking at that source, I have a lot of different options here syntax-wise. And really, this syntax is allowing for highlighting, so that way I can have specific highlighting associated with the theme, so it's looking at specific pieces. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a particular use case for each one of these options, and part of that's going to depend upon your implementation as well. So if we were talking something, say, CSS-wise, you could theoretically have a piece of CSS that you wanted included on your page. But honestly, I think I agree with you on that one. I don't know if that would necessarily be a use case that you'd want your typical editors doing.
In general, because the component is going to be inserted into your page, they are designed to function as HTML, because at the end of the day, they need to be valid XML to work with the page, or else it won't render properly. So with components, it's best to write them as plain HTML more than anything else.
Perfect. Question, does the image need to be a standard size, or will larger images shrink to fit the component? So the component itself is simply the editing experience. The source code that you have here and the CSS you have associated with it, it's what's going to dictate what will happen with those images. So if around my image node, I have a very specific div container with a very specific dimension, that can influence how big the image will appear in it. Additionally, if I have CSS that's being applied to my image classes, that will apply to it as well. So that information about whether or not I have to stick with a very specific image size is going to be dependent upon your website design in the source code and the CSS rather than the component itself. All right. So it looks like we've answered a lot of these generalized questions. Let's come back to my handy dandy PowerPoint. And let's talk about snippets that should not be converted into components, because this is going to be particularly important, and it's going to answer a handful of questions that we have up here already. So essentially, there are certain types of snippets that are not going to work well as components as we have it. The first is a snippet with a variable number of rows. So a good example of that is like your accordions or your tabs. So what I'm talking about there, let's go back to my library page. I'm going to open up that region here, and I'm just going to remove my two components so I have a nice blank space again. One of the snippets that I have that is part of my design is an accordion. So I'll click on a little puzzle piece. I've separated my category out into my Trading Tuesday examples, and I have my accordion here. When my accordion comes in, it has 3 rows. When I save and exit, I'll be able to see the accordion itself is coming in with 3 rows. But I can adjust this because it's a table. So if I wanted, say, an additional row, hovering over this, placing my cursor down here in this bottom row, I'm going to right click, hover over row, I'm going to insert a row after this line. So this is now row 4. So I have that flexibility using the table transformation snippet to be able to add or remove additional rows in my accordion. I see this done with accordions, I see it done with tabs, and anything like that. Now, this particular type of table transformation snippet will not allow that functionality as a component. Remember, with the component, I am dropping in the very specific code that I have listed here. I'm specifying the very specific questions that are listed here. So I don't have that flexibility at this time to be able to just add in additional rows. It is a locked format the way it's set up. So if I wanted an accordion and I wanted to specify 3 rows only, I could take the source code for 3 rows, set up prompts for only 3 rows, and set that up. But at that point, I would want to potentially have a separate component for an accordion that was 1 row, an accordion that was 2 rows, an accordion that was 3 rows, and so on. In that case, it may simply be easier to leave it set up as the table transformation. Other types of snippets that I would not recommend converting over into components include snippets that are nested with variable numbers of child snippets. So a good example of that would be a slider with individual slides inside. So what I'm talking about there is if you have these nested snippets. So again, inserting my snippet and choosing my Training Tuesday examples, I have a slide holder, which is essentially kind of an outside snippet, and nested inside of it, I add each one of my individual slides themselves. So we'll go ahead and put a couple of them in here. Perfect. Ooh, and then I broke my snippet here. Oh no. You were functioning so well when I built you, sir. All right. Anyway, so each one of these individual slides is its own slide in the slider. So I can add in as many slides as I want as part of this nested snippet working here. This again is not one that I would recommend just because the code that I'm putting into that component is locked in. It is giving me very specific form fields to fill in. So if I had a set number of slides that I wanted inside of here, I could create that as a component, but it would always need to be that number, no more, no less. So let's see. We talked about that one. We talked about that one. We talked about that one. Question here, kind of more agile, movable version of a multi-edit feature. Yes, agreed. So what you're getting here is very similar to what you would see on a multi-edit, and it also has that relation back to the original source code, so you could make changes across your entire site. Perfect. Okay. So in addition to kind of these nested where I have variable numbers of different snippets that I can place inside of it, another type of snippet that I would not recommend switching over would be snippets with variable options for child snippets. So an example of this would be like if I have multiple cards, and then inside the card holder itself, I can have a card that has just text, or a card that has an image and text, or a card that is image only. Again, I could create it as a component, but I'd want to create each of those separate configurations as its own component, because I don't have the option when I'm building out that component to be able to take one out and drop a different one in. Is there a way for a drop-down or a radio field to output an empty value? Values when I'm putting into radio buttons or drop downs are required. So back over here for my components list, so let's cancel out of this one we've been playing with. I've created this lovely listing here of my different component fields. So checking this out, let's look at my form elements. So the question was under radio buttons drop down, probably the same kind of idea across the way. Can I have a blank option here? So if I add a blank option here and just say hit save, it's going to require me to have that in there. So there is no ability at this point to be able to have a blank option for radio buttons or for drop downs or things like that. You could theoretically have a key value pair on this. So any of your options that are the multiple choice like this, under your advanced tab, you can have a key value pair. So if you wanted a value to be placed at that was blank, you could have text here, which would be the choice the person would make, but have a different value set up here. So it may have to be something more like a blank value, but that's something you could do. You could also have, say, the XSL acting in the background. So if you had blank chosen here, the XSL could pull out the word blank and replace it with just a null value. Perfect. All right, another question. How do I get the components icon to appear in my toolbar? Excellent question. So under setup, you have toolbars. These are the toolbars that you've created and customized. Quick refresh here. Perfect. So if you had custom toolbars set up when OU Campus did the release, we did not automatically pop in the component. That icon we left for you as an administrator to be able to add in. So if you had a pre-configured toolbar, you would need to come into the toolbar and add it in as the little atom icon here. So that you would need to do for any custom toolbars that you already have set up if you would like to include components in it.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you're using the default toolbar, it's automatically added in. Also, if anybody is still using the older classic editor, components is not available in that interface, so you would want to switch over to using just edit in order to be able to use and edit components.
Thank you, Erica. So question here, do we have a page or ideas where several different use cases for components to be inspired by what has already been done? So one of the magical things about components is they're new. So we're still building out our own kind of repertoire as well. So what we're seeing here and what I have built here are really things that I've built in my own sandbox. So that would actually be an excellent opportunity to have a discussion on our Omni Update community network. It's a great place for our customers to be able to talk to each other, trade ideas and best practices. So we don't have anything particular set up yet, but as we build more things out as well, we'll also be building out our support site. So you'll be able to see more things in there as well. Question here, in the component source, can we use both HTML and PHP and use PHP to check if an optional form element is blank? So when you drop your component code onto your page, it will need to have appropriate encoding in order for the page to render it appropriately. Because remember, your pages are XML. So oftentimes when you're including code like PHP or some other server-side scripts, it's oftentimes easier to have those set up as source code assets that are dropped on the page, or as include files where you have the include line included on it. But that might be something that we would need to really test out on a case-by-case basis to see if you could have something like that. Point for how components can be used, press releases. Great choice for one of our customers here to allow to have that consistency across the board. We have multiple sets of templates. Is there a way to distinguish which components are compatible with which sets of templates? So when you build out your component source code, you have that control to dictate where it's going to work. So this is really where you're going to be able to include things like classes, or include container divs and things like that that are specific to different pieces. So as you build them, you can essentially kind of dictate what source code you have in here. Let's see. Can an asset be added into the source of a component? So one of your advanced elements that you can have is an asset chooser. So you could include assets as part of your components. It will just be an additional form field that you'll click on and be able to choose the asset that you should like. In your advanced field, you can even specify which asset type it is. So you can hone in on specific things, like if you wanted an image gallery in this particular place, you can lock that particular asset chooser to that type of asset. You can also set it up so it is only going to give you a listing of assets that have a particular tag. So you could do that as well. Point here, there has been a test and use PHP mixed with HTML. Excellent. So it looks like we do have a use case and test for that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Can you add components to include .inc like side navigation files? So more often than not, when we're talking about a side navigation file, especially a .inc, when you open it up, it is going to be your classic editor here. So as Erica had mentioned, components are not currently configured with the classic editor. So it would not work to be able to drop it into the .inc as it is currently set up. Can it be hard-coded into the component such that it is not choosable by someone who can edit the component? So we're talking about, sorry, Erica, go ahead.
It is, you can't put a component into the, or sorry, you cannot put an asset into the actual source code of the component. So if you wanted an asset, it has to be via the asset chooser and not the component source code. So.
Okay. So back over to our handy dandy PowerPoint. We were farther than this. So we talked about all these. Essentially, caveat at the bottom, it could be possible to create any of these options as a separate component that has its own fixed number of rows, fixed number of slides, fixed number of options. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is how to convert your snippet over into a component. So that's actually a pretty simple process if you're using a table transformation. So essentially, you're going to copy your snippet source code and paste it into a new component. You'll create your component form fields. You'll insert the form input into the appropriate place in the component source code, set up any properties that you'd like to have set, and then you launch. So let's take a look at that. Back to content snippets. I have an example here of a 2-column snippet. This is a nice basic snippet. I drop it into the editable region. It is not nested in any way, and it has specific prompts for it. So this is a great chunk of code to be able to just drag in. I don't need to do any XSL additional to it. When I'm pulling it in and it will include this table class, the XSL will find it. So I don't have to do any additional work for it. So I'm going to copy this code back over to content components. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call this my 2-column component. Create. Under source code over here, I'm just going to go ahead and drop in the code itself. Under form elements, I now need to create the questions that I want to prompt people with. So what will probably be easiest here is for me to remove this one and actually take a look at my 2-column here. So I can see here, my 2-column is literally just 2 columns. I have these headings at the top, and then the content itself is column 1 here, column 2 here. So back to the source code over here, column 1 here, column 2 here. Those are the pieces of content that I need to replace with a form question. So back to my form elements, my short text I have here. I'm just going to click and drag it in there. This is going to be content for column 1. Helper text is going to be text that appears underneath the form question itself. Please write complete sentences. And then my placeholder text is going to be text that's already going to be in this box to start. I can set this up as a required field or not, and I also have the ability of setting minimum or maximum length requirements on it. In my advanced tab for any of my text, I do have the option to validate with a regular expression. So if there's something super specific that I want to include in this, I can have a regular expression set up. If you need some help building out regular expressions, our support team is awesome at it, so they can help you with that. Perfect. So as I saw, I can click, drag, and drop. I can also just click once, and it'll add it to the bottom of my list. So this is going to be content for column 2. Beautiful. So now I have my 2 different form field questions ready and set. Back over to my source, now I have to specify where the inputs should go for this. So what I can do is I can say delete out all of that filler content for column 1, and then I can click and drag into this space here. I also like to simply highlight what it is I'm replacing, and I can click the question once. It'll just drop where my cursor was left or what text I have highlighted and just replace it with the input. I like that one better, but you do you. Bottom right hand corner, save. Perfect. And now I can just launch. Excellent. I've been launched successfully. Back to my library page. So here's my snippet version of it. And here's my component version of it. So this is my example text over here. Here's the content for the second column. Save. Again, I did not choose to have it preview, so that's why I see it as the pill. But as I save and exit, I'll be able to see it set up here. Notice my placeholder text is not being used in the component itself. It is just that form field, so I have some text to prompt me, but it is not like a default text that is being used in that field. So I definitely want to make sure that I have some content in here. How you can be larger than 0. Oh, did I put a minimum requirement on that one without meaning to? I may have. Let's check that one out and take a look at my form element here. And then my advanced field, save. Okay, cancel, quick refresh. I recommend if you're going to put minimum size requirements on it, you make sure you set that up correctly. I'm gonna have to take a look at that one and see how I
think you have the maximum set as 0 as well.
That would do it.
Or,
And launch. Cancel. Refresh. Now it works. Thanks, Erica. Perfect. All right, so let's talk about the rest of those form fields and what other options you have. So back to my components list, I have my component fields here. I just created this quick sample that just had each of them. So short text, long text, both same generalized idea, same fields, and again, under advanced, I do have the ability of adding in a regular expression. I do have an email prompt here as well. This is actually going to add email address format validation when your editor is adding in the email itself. So you can make sure that the formatting is going to be appropriate, especially if you're adding it into like a mail to link. You're going to want to make sure that's formatted appropriately. So this is a great option if you are asking for emails rather than using just a text form. Checkboxes, radio buttons, all of those, you can pre-select your values here. And then in under advanced, you can have key value pairs. So if you want to prompt someone to say put in which department they're a part of, and you want to then use that as like the telephone link, you could have their department as the value they choose and the telephone number here, and have the telephone number inserted into the component. Date and time picker allows you to decide if you want both date and time or only date or only time. You can also set your default date and time in the advanced field. So if there's a specific one that should be the default value, you can have that here. Instructional text is just text that is explanation for your editor. So this is going to appear on the form itself, but it will not be a field that they can fill in. And as a matter of fact, in the source code itself, You won't even see it listed as a form element that can be dropped in because it itself is not accepting any kind of input. It is just explanation. So if you wanted to have that opportunity to be able to give your editors a little bit more explanation about what this is or give some information about disclaimers, things like that, you can use an instructional text form field. Your source code editor is going to allow you to drop a source code editor directly into the component itself. So on our support site, we actually use this one whenever we have source code that we're adding onto our page. So it is for display on our support site, but it allows your editors to be able to put in actual source code and have that formatting there. File chooser. Again, your basic fields here, but the nice thing in the advanced field is you can specify the starting location. So on the component that I had created, I specified you should be in this student's folder that is inside _resources. So I can give them the starting location. You can also specify specific file types that would be available as part of the listing. Lock to path means that your editor cannot navigate out of that path. So they can't like back up and go into a different folder. And then the default server for your files, staging is OU Campus, production is on your production server. So for most of you, leaving this set to staging will work well because most of your files are going to be inside OU Campus and then you publish them out. If you have binary manager turned off, or if you had a whole bunch of images, say FTP directly into your production server, and they're not living inside OU Campus, you could have the default set to production instead, and then your editors would be able to go directly there to be able to get files or images or things like that. Again, same idea with the image chooser, with the starting location, lock to path, and the default server. Asset chooser we'd seen before. So in addition to giving all of your label information, you can dictate what type of asset, and you can have it available by tag instead. So if you have more than one type you want to include, I'd recommend using that tag option. So you could tag the different assets inside your the asset manager, and then you could filter by that tag here. Finally, down at the bottom, your tag chooser. This allows you to be able to have your editors choose tags. Now, the benefit of using tags is that you'll get that listing of tags that are available inside OU Campus. I see this used on, say, news pages or blog pages if you're using tags in order to do filtering or things like that. Your tag listing here, a fixed tag, is something that will be included on the page by default, so it'll already be there. A filtered tag is a listing of options. So if I only want my people to be able to choose either admissions or training, I could have those as filtered tags listed here, and those would be the options in that list. Perfect. All right. Back over here, the last thing I wanted to talk with you today has to do with considerations for snippets with select lists. So essentially, select lists are an additional inclusion in some of our newer implementations where inside a table cell, rather than just having text that you fill in, when you click on it, JavaScript is going to provide to you a listing of options and you can choose those options. If you're going to take one of those snippets and convert it into a component, the select list options must be reproduced within the component as well. So essentially, inside the code of the snippet, you're going to see a node that has this data select list equals attribute. This is going to be the name of the JSON file that has all the options listed. And you'll be able to find that inside this particular file path. So _resources, OU editor, select list JSON. That's where you'll find that file that has the options listed. So let me show you what that looks like. Again, back to content snippets. Inside my Training Tuesday example, I have a select list example here. So essentially, this particular snippet here gives, this particular snippet here is going to give me the option of all of my majors. So it's going to be a drop-down list that is available for my editors to choose from. I can see right here, there's the node that's pulling in the select list that is called majors. And it has a default value here already set up of accounting. So let's go find that list. Hovering over content, I'm going to open pages in a new tab. Inside underscore resources, inside OU, inside editor, I have a folder called select lists, and then I have a JSON. If you do have select lists implemented, you may have a lot more JSON files in here than I do. I just have the one for our example today. But essentially in here, I'm going to see the listing of all of the different options. So there's my accounting, there's my default value, and then all of these are the additional options that are available. So if I was going to convert this into a component for that particular field, I'd want to make sure that I had a drop down or a radio button or whatever is appropriate that provided each one of these individual options. The XSL in the background is looking for one of these options. So you would want to have this reproduced inside the component to make sure that you had it set up. For some implementations, I've seen that instead of having just a singular value here, I've seen key value pairs. So you have a certain thing that you choose from the dropdown, but when you click on it, the actual text itself changes. Maybe it becomes the name of the class, but it was listed in a friendlier term when you were actually choosing it. In that case, you'd want the value itself, so the name of the class, the thing that gets locked in after I choose the option from the dropdown. Those would be the options you'd want listed. And again, you could set that up simply as key value pairs in your component. So let's say I wanted to set it up as a dropdown. Each one of my options in this list, I'd add them here. And if it was a key value pair situation, this would be the friendly name. And over here, there'd be the value for it. Whew. So that was a lot. I hope you guys all had an opportunity to be able to ask and have your questions answered. If you have any additional questions, of course, I am here. I'm going to give you guys a moment to type. But while we do that, let's talk about the next Training Tuesday. Erica, would you like to preview this for us?
Yes, so next month's Training Tuesday is going to be on February 26th. We're going to be talking about components inside and out, which is going to go a little deeper into depth about components and how they use HTML. So less of more sort of the basic use cases and getting further into their inner workings. As always, keep an eye on the OCN or the support site for the registration link.
Perfect. Thanks, Erica. All right, we got one more question, bit off topic, but for the snippet source code, can they make the editor expandable? That is an excellent question. That would be an excellent opportunity for one of our feedback forum posts. So what I'll do is I'll take a look at our feedback forum, see if we have that one already included in the list, and I can send it out. And if not, we can create a new one for it. I agree. I would love to be able to expand that list. So inside my snippets, over here, to be able to just make this expandable. So that way I have a little bit more space. I guess depending upon the size of your screen, you may have a little bit more of a restriction, but I'm with you on that one. That would be nice. All right. Perfect. I want to thank you all for attending today. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And as I said, next month, tune back in for more components, February 26th. The email will be going out as always. And one more thing, when you leave, don't forget to fill out the feedback survey that pops up. We love hearing from you guys, and it helps us pick which topics for future Training Tuesdays that you are most interested in. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.